My name is Claire. I am 32 years old, and the story I am about to tell you still makes my chest tighten whenever I think of it. Picture this: a quiet Sunday evening, the table set with polished silverware, roast beef steaming in the center, my parents chatting as if everything was perfectly normal. Then, without a trace of hesitation, my younger brother lifted his champagne glass and announced to the entire table that he would be moving into my home next week. His words landed like a thunderclap. Everyone turned their eyes toward me, smiling as though this arrangement had already been sealed, while inside my stomach twisted with disbelief. That moment did not come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of years of imbalance, years of me carrying my own weight, while my brother floated on excuses. Still, the boldness of his proclamation stunned me. He had not asked, he had declared. And in that silence, I felt the air tighten around me as if everyone else had rehearsed this performance except me. Let me take you back, because for this story to make sense, you need to know who I am and how hard I fought for the independence they were now so eager to strip away. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, in what looked from the outside like a normal middle-class family. My father was an accountant, my mother taught second grade. They worked hard, they gave us what we needed, but when it came to me and my brother, the rules were never equal. I was the saver, the planner, the one who did chores and waited weeks to buy a single book with allowance money. My brother cried in the store aisle and walked out with a toy. I studied until midnight, worked 2 jobs to cover textbooks, and listened to lectures about responsibility. He failed out of college after 3 semesters and was quietly given a second chance tuition covered by our parents. That same pattern followed us into adulthood. By the time I was 29, after 8 grueling years of saving, budgeting, and working my way up from assistant to agent in a real estate firm, I had finally bought my dream home. That house was not just a place to live. It was proof. Proof that sacrifice mattered, that skipping vacations, refusing luxuries, and grinding through endless workdays actually added up to something tangible. The day I held those keys in my hand, I cried. Alone in my car, I let the tears flow, because every brick, every floorboard, every window was a monument to my independence. And that is exactly why years later, hearing my brother claim my home as if it were his birthright cut so deeply. The entitlement in his voice was not new, but it was heavier, sharper, because my parents nodded along. They had set the table, poured the wine, dressed the evening in celebration, all to honor a decision that had been made for me, not with me. I sat there, my hands resting on the edge of the table, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something stronger than shock. I felt clarity. They thought they had cornered me, but I had already prepared a surprise none of them saw coming. But before I continue, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a moment where your family expected your compliance without asking for your consent? If you have, leave a comment sharing your story. And if you know the courage it takes to hold your ground, hit that subscribe button. Because the story you are about to hear is not just about family drama, it is about reclaiming your voice when everyone else is trying to silence it. And believe me, the night my brother tried to claim my house was only the beginning. My name is Claire, and if the dinner announcement from my brother sounded outrageous, it was only one scene in a much longer play. I had to rewind and remind myself where I came from, because otherwise, his arrogance would seem impossible to explain. I was 32, single, and independent. That independence was not gifted. It was earned, scraped together, dollar by dollar, shift by shift, year after year. I had always been the reliable one, the responsible one. My parents praised my maturity, but their praise was never as loud as their sympathy for my younger brother, Ethan. He was 3 years younger than me, but emotionally, he never seemed to grow beyond adolescence. Growing up, Ethan lived under a different set of rules. If he wanted something, he cried until he got it. If I wanted something, I worked until I could afford it. I remember a summer when I juggled 2 jobs to pay for college textbooks. Meanwhile, Ethan spent his days playing video games, laughing with friends, never worrying about money because he knew someone else would cover the bill. This pattern stretched into adulthood. When I went to college, I took out loans and hustled part-time jobs. When Ethan followed 2 years later, our parents gave him a free ride. He failed out in 3 semesters, and instead of tough love, he was handed another chance at community college. He failed again. Every stumble was excused. Every consequence was softened. By contrast, I built something real. I worked in real estate starting from the bottom. Every commission check, I saved a slice for the future. I wanted a home of my own, and after 8 long years, I finally signed papers on a beautiful 3-bedroom craftsman in the suburbs. That house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was proof that my sacrifices mattered. I had skipped vacations, turned down luxuries, lived below my means, all to walk through the front door of a place that belonged to me. Ethan never congratulated me. At my housewarming party, he arrived 3 hours late, empty-handed, and spent the night complaining about his girlfriend drama. When he finally glanced around my living room, all he asked was whether he could host a party there since his apartment was too small. When I said no, he sulked for a week, sending texts accusing me of being stuck up. I wish I could say that was the last time, but it wasn't. For years, he bounced from job to job, bartender, phone salesman, assistant manager, always fired for bad luck or toxic bosses. Meanwhile, our parents wrote rent checks, bought him cars, and even paid off his credit card debt more than once. Every time he failed, they rushed in to rescue him while I was told to tough it out to figure things out myself. That double standard carved itself deep into my life. And it is why, on that night, when he raised his glass and announced he would be moving into my house, my smile stayed fixed, even as my heart pounded. Because while he thought he was making a bold declaration, I already knew something he didn't. My house, the very place he thought would be his safety net, was no longer mine. Before I reveal what happened next, let me pause here. If you have ever had to stand your ground against family expectations, you understand the weight I was carrying that night. Take a moment to drop a comment below. Have you ever been forced to choose between your own boundaries and someone else's entitlement? And if you are following my journey, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. The more we share these stories, the more we remind ourselves that setting boundaries is not selfish, it is survival. When I looked at my brother across the dinner table, smug and certain I knew the script he was expecting, he thought I would sigh, roll my eyes, and let him take over my spare room. But the truth was waiting in a manila envelope inside my purse, and once I pulled it out, there would be no going back. That night was not about roast beef or family tradition. It was about power, who had it, who abused it, and whether I was finally brave enough to claim my own. And that is where the story turns. I grew up in a household where love and discipline were never evenly distributed. If you want to understand why that dinner announcement carried so much weight, you need to see how it all started, back when I was a child, and fairness was just a word no one lived by. As a little girl, I learned the value of money the hard way. If I wanted a book, I had to save my allowance for weeks. I folded laundry, scrubbed dishes, raked leaves in the backyard, and counted coins until I finally had enough. Ethan, on the other hand, could throw a tantrum in a store aisle, and he would walk out clutching a brand new toy. My parents always said he was sensitive and needed extra support. Sensitive meant spoiled. Sensitive meant rules never applied to him the way they applied to me. By the time I was in high school, the pattern was undeniable. I pulled straight A's, took babysitting jobs, and worked summers just to afford clothes and the occasional night out. Ethan barely passed his classes and still had the latest sneakers, the newest video games, and a car bought for him before he even earned his license. When I asked why I had to pay for my own things, my mother sighed and said, "Because you're stronger, Claire. Your brother isn't like you." That phrase haunted me. He isn't like you. What it really meant was, you can handle hardship, so we'll let you. He can't, so we'll shield him forever. And in that twisted logic, I was punished for being capable, while he was rewarded for refusing to grow. The divide only widened when it came time for college. I worked double shifts all summer to cover textbooks. I signed loan papers and calculated interest rates, already planning how many years it would take to pay them off. Ethan, 2 years later, breezed into the same university on my parents' dime. He partied more than he studied, failed out in 3 semesters, and was quietly handed another chance at community college. He dropped out again. And every time my parents shook their heads and muttered about bad luck instead of bad choices. Meanwhile, I kept pushing forward. I had no safety net. If my rent was due, I paid it. If my car broke down, I found a way to fix it, even if it meant eating ramen noodles for a month. Ethan's breakdowns were solved with bailouts. Mine were solved with grit. And year after year, the resentment grew unspoken, but heavy until it hardened into a truth I could not ignore. Looking back now, I realize that my brother's announcement at that dinner was not spontaneous. It was the natural result of decades of being told he could take without asking, while I was expected to give without complaint. Of course, he believed he could just move into my house. Why wouldn't he? My parents had trained him to believe the world would always make space for him, even if it meant pushing me aside. I sat there that night, staring at him across the table, remembering every moment from childhood when my needs were dismissed so his could be met. And for the first time, I felt the weight lift. Because this time, I was not a child saving coins for a book. I was a woman with a career, a bank account, and a signed contract that none of them saw coming. So, have you ever been labeled the strong one in your family, the one expected to carry burdens while someone else was coddled? If you have, tell me in the comments because your voice matters. And if you're listening to this thinking of your own family dynamics, hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the story. These aren't just tales, they are reminders that strength deserves respect, not exploitation. What they didn't know that night was simple. I had already made a choice that would rewrite the script my family thought they had prepared for me. My brother believed the house was his next safety net, but the truth waiting inside that envelope in my purse would crush that illusion and change the balance forever. And that brings us closer to the storm that was waiting to break. By the time I reached adulthood, the gap between me and Ethan was no longer just a matter of childhood squabbles, it had become a canyon. Our lives moved in opposite directions, and the contrast could not have been sharper. I worked my way through college with loans, part-time jobs, and endless hours in the library. My degree in business was not handed to me, it was carved out of exhaustion and persistence. When graduation came, I stepped into the real estate world, knowing I had to prove myself in a competitive market. I started as an assistant making coffee runs, filing contracts, and learning the grind from the bottom up. Every deal I touched, every late night at the office was one more step toward a dream I refused to give up. Ethan, meanwhile, drifted from one failure to the next. After dropping out of community college, he bounced between jobs like they were casual dates. Bartender fired for giving away free drinks. Phone store clerk dismissed after inventory mysteriously disappeared. Insurance agent never even passed the licensing exam. Each failure came with the same excuses: bad bosses, jealous coworkers, unlucky timing. Never once did he look in the mirror. What stunned me was not his lack of accountability, but how my parents treated him after every disaster. Instead of telling him to face the consequences, they cushioned his falls with money. Rent checks magically appeared when he came up short. A car was bought for him when his old one died. Twice, yes, twice, they paid off his credit card debt after he maxed it out on concerts and trips. I could barely get advice about public transportation when my own car broke down. The double standard wasn't just frustrating, it was suffocating. I had to be the adult in my own life long before my 20s, while Ethan remained a child in his 30s. He had the luxury of failing without consequences, while I carried the burden of succeeding without support. By the time I was 29, after 7 years of relentless saving, I was finally ready for the leap. The housing market in Chicago was hot, homes were disappearing within days of being listed. I had money for a down payment, and with my background in real estate, I knew exactly what I wanted. When a 3-bedroom Craftsman came on the market, I pounced. The hardwood floors gleamed, the bay window poured sunlight into the living room, and the built-in bookshelves whispered of quiet evenings with novels. It was love at first sight, even if the asking price sat at the very top of my budget. Securing the mortgage was brutal. As a single woman, every dollar I earned was scrutinized, every document verified twice. I remember sitting in my car after signing the final papers, clutching the keys, and sobbing for 10 full minutes. That house wasn't just shelter. It was proof that my sacrifices had meaning, that every late night, every skipped vacation, every choice to save instead of spend had built something real. My parents came to the housewarming party. For once, they seemed proud, my father grilling in the backyard, my mother helping me arrange furniture. They gave me a gift card to a home improvement store, and I let myself believe just for that day that my efforts were finally recognized. But Ethan ruined even that moment. He arrived 3 hours late, brought nothing, and spent the evening complaining about his girlfriend. When he finally noticed my house, His only comment was whether he could host a party there since his apartment was too small. When I said no, he sulked, texting me for days about how I had changed. That was Ethan's pattern. He failed, and others paid. I succeeded, and somehow I was punished for it. The night at that dinner table when he raised his glass and announced he was moving in with me, I remembered all of this. Every imbalance, every sacrifice, every unfair moment. But I also remembered something else, something he didn't know, because the house he thought would save him was already gone. Have you ever built something on your own blood, sweat, and sleepless nights only to watch someone else treat it like their birthright? If you know that sting, drop a comment below. And if you want to hear how this story turned, subscribe and stay with me. What came next shocked even me. That night was not about roast beef and small talk. It was about power. And the moment I revealed the truth, the balance of power would finally shift. The moment I stepped into that house for the very first time, I knew it wasn't just a purchase. It was a victory. After years of saving, years of clawing my way forward, I finally had a space that was mine. Hardwood floors that glowed under sunlight, a bay window where the morning light painted everything gold, built-in bookshelves whispering promises of quiet nights filled with stories. It was more than wood and nails, it was my sanctuary. Owning that house felt like stepping into the life I had dreamed of when I was younger, the life I had fought to create. Every corner carried a memory of sacrifice, skipped vacations, late-night shifts, weekends, working while friends went out. That house stood as a monument to my discipline. My tears when I signed the closing papers weren't sadness, they were relief proof that my hard work meant something. But that pride was fragile. At my housewarming party, I caught a glimpse of how easily it could be undermined. My parents were there smiling, helping me decorate. My dad flipped burgers in the backyard. My mom fussed over curtains. For once, I thought they saw me not as the strong one who could handle everything, but as a daughter worth celebrating. And then Ethan walked in. 3 hours late, no gift, no congratulations. Just complaints about his girlfriend and sly questions about when he could host a party in my new home. His tone wasn't curiosity, it was entitlement. When I told him no, his sulky texts rolled in for days. You've changed. You think you're better than us now. Still, I didn't let him tarnish the joy. For 2 years, that house was bliss. I painted walls, planted a garden, slowly filled each room with furniture chosen, not because it was cheap, but because I loved it. The mortgage was steep, yes, and repairs sometimes made my budget scream. But it was worth every penny to sit in a space that belonged to me alone. And then, like clockwork, Ethan's chaos crept back in. He lost another job, something about inventory issues again. His landlord decided not to renew his lease after too many noise complaints. Suddenly, his carefully constructed life unraveled, and our parents predictably wrung their hands about how unfair the world was to their baby boy. I should have seen the warning signs. The sudden increase in calls from my parents, vague references to family matters we'll discuss at dinner. Ethan texting me about my Wi-Fi speed and whether my spare room could fit a king-size bed. I brushed it off, telling myself he was just being nosy. But deep down, I think I knew something was brewing. The truth was, while Ethan's world was collapsing, mine was cracking in quieter ways. The house I loved so much began showing its true age. A tiny leak turned into a plumbing disaster that cost over $7,000 to fix. My emergency fund vanished in one repair after another. I'd always sworn I'd never rack up credit card debt, not after watching Ethan drown in it. But the numbers were catching up to me. My financial advisor finally said what I had been avoiding: Claire, your house poor. You could sell now while the market is hot and walk away with equity. You'd have breathing room again. At first, the idea felt like failure. This house was my dream, my proof. But as I stared at my mounting bills, I realized she was right. The dream was bleeding me dry. So I made the hardest choice of my life. I sold it, quietly, without telling my family. The buyers were eager, and within weeks the deal was done. And that decision, the one they didn't know about, was the ace hidden in my hand at that infamous family dinner. So, have you ever clung to something because of what it represented, even when it was destroying your peace? Tell me in the comments, what was the hardest thing you ever had to let go? And if you've ever had to make a painful but necessary decision, stay with me. Because what happened next will show you how letting go of one dream can open the door to something greater. That night, as I stared across the table at Ethan smug and certain I felt the weight of my secret. He thought he was moving in. My parents thought they were about to announce it as a done deal. But the truth in that manila envelope inside my purse was about to flip the script in ways none of them imagined. And when the moment came, it was explosive. The weeks before that family dinner felt strange, like the quiet before a storm. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but little things kept piling up hints of something I couldn't quite name. My parents, who usually called me once a week on Sunday afternoons, suddenly began calling 3 times in the same week. Each time their words felt rehearsed. "There are some family matters we want to discuss," my mom would say, dodging my questions when I pressed for details. My dad, usually straightforward, repeated the same line, "We'll talk in person, sweetheart." Their voices carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Ethan, meanwhile, became oddly inquisitive. After months of silence, his texts arrived out of nowhere. "Hey, what's your internet speed?" Thinking about switching providers, I replied with a vague answer, but something in my gut twisted. A day later, another text. "Which bedroom gets the best natural light?" I stared at my phone, baffled. Why would he care? Then came the clincher. "What are the dimensions of your spare bedroom? Just wondering if a king-size bed would fit." The so-called spare bedroom was my home office, the place where I worked late evenings and weekends surrounded by stacks of real estate contracts. It wasn't and never had been a guest room. His casual assumption that it could be turned into one was unsettling. I asked him directly why he needed to know. His reply, no reason, followed by a smiley face. Something was happening. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. But between a demanding client who kept shifting her requirements for luxury properties and a $7,000 plumbing disaster draining my savings, I convinced myself I was too busy to unravel Ethan's strange behavior. In truth, I was exhausted. The dream house I had fought for was draining me dry, and the stress of juggling clients, repairs, and bills left me little room to dwell on cryptic phone calls. Still, every piece of the puzzle was falling into place. My parents' vague comments, Ethan's sudden curiosity, the way they kept talking about family sticking together. Looking back, it was obvious. They were setting me up. And I will admit, a part of me dreaded that dinner. I knew something was coming, though I didn't know exactly what form it would take. The roast, the champagne chilling in an ice bucket, the special occasion feel, it was all orchestrated. Everyone was in on the plan, except me. The irony, of course, was that I had my own secret. While they schemed to install Ethan in my house, I had already signed the closing documents to sell it. I had chosen silence deliberately. I didn't want debates, guilt trips, or interventions. For once in my life, the decision was mine alone. And yet, walking into that dinner with my manila envelope tucked in my purse, I felt the weight of decades pressing down, decades of being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who sacrificed so others could coast. The stage was set. They thought they had cornered me. They didn't know I had already flipped the board. Have you ever sensed people plotting around you, making decisions about your life without your consent? If you have, tell me in the comments. And if you're still here listening closely, subscribe, because the twist you're about to hear is one of the most satisfying I've ever lived through. That night, the signs became impossible to ignore: the good china, the champagne, the nervous glances. My parents thought they had scripted the evening, but I had a different ending written. And when the moment came, the shock on their faces would be worth every ounce of silence I had endured in the weeks leading up to it. The storm was about to break. By the time that dinner arrived, I was already worn thin. Between work chaos and the house bleeding me dry, my nerves were frayed to the bone. What no one at that table understood was that I was already in crisis long before Ethan raised his glass. It began with what looked like a harmless drip under my kitchen sink. I thought it was nothing, a small leak, an easy fix. But within days, it spiraled into a full plumbing nightmare. The main water line was compromised, and the plumber, with the sympathetic look of someone who knows they're ruining your week, handed me the bill over $7,000. $7,000. My emergency fund evaporated with that one repair. And this was only months after replacing a water heater and dealing with faulty electrical wiring. The house I had once seen as my sanctuary was becoming a money pit. Every time I caught my breath, another crisis landed. I lay awake at night doing math in my head, calculating whether I'd have enough left after the mortgage, utilities, and mounting repairs. For someone who had worked so hard to avoid debt, the thought of swiping my credit card to survive filled me with dread. I sat in my financial advisor Sandra's office one evening, hands trembling as I spread my bills across her desk. She looked at me with the kind of calm honesty I needed but hated to hear. "Claire, you're house poor," she said gently. "You're putting every dollar you earn into maintaining a property that's draining you. If you keep this up, you're headed toward financial disaster." Her words stung. That house wasn't just four walls. It was proof of my independence, my grit. Selling it felt like giving up everything I had worked for. But Sandra pressed on. "You bought at a good time. The market is strong. If you sell now, you'll walk away with equity enough for a fresh start. You can downsize, rebuild your savings, and actually breathe again." I drove home that night in silence, staring at the neat rows of houses along the streets, each one glowing with warm light. Mine waited at the end, familiar and heavy with memories. Walking through the door, I brushed my fingers across the built-in bookshelves, the bay window, the hardwood floors I had polished so many times. Tears blurred my vision. Letting go of this place felt like failure, but clinging to it was destroying me. After another week of sleepless nights and calculator marathons, I called my colleague Melissa, a seasoned real estate agent. She walked through the house with sharp professional eyes. Where I saw memories, she saw numbers. "You could list above what you paid 2 years ago," she told me. "I already have buyers lined up who lost a bidding war in this neighborhood. They're eager. You could close quickly." And that's exactly what happened. Within days, I had an offer 5% above asking price with only one condition: a quick closing. They even agreed to let me rent the house for 30 days after the sale so I'd have time to move. It was almost too good to be true. When I signed those papers, I cried again. But these tears were different. They weren't pride like before. They were grief relief, fear, and liberation tangled together. I had taken control of a situation that was crushing me. For once, I wasn't letting emotions chain me to a sinking ship. No one in my family knew. Not my parents, not Ethan. Especially not Ethan. To them, that house was the shining symbol of my independence, the very place they assumed would bail him out of his latest disaster. They had no idea it was already gone. And that secret sitting in a manila envelope inside my purse gave me strength. For years, I had been the one without choices expected to endure whatever was handed to me. But this time, I had written my own ending. Have you ever faced a choice that felt like betrayal of your dreams, yet deep down, you knew it was survival? Tell me in the comments if you've ever had to walk away from something you loved just to save yourself. And if you're still here, subscribe so you won't miss how this story explodes at the dinner table. Because the night Ethan tried to claim my house, he was walking straight into a truth none of them were ready for. What? And when I finally pulled out that envelope, silence would cut sharper than any scream. The hardest choices in life rarely arrive with trumpets or warning bells. They creep in, slowly wearing you down, until one day you realize you've crossed a line you cannot uncross. That's what happened with my house. For 2 years, it had been my symbol of independence, the monument to every sacrifice I had ever made. But by the 3rd year, it was bleeding me dry, and I finally admitted what I had been too proud to say out loud. I couldn't keep it. The night after Sandra, my financial advisor, told me to consider selling, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator, a stack of bills, and a pounding headache. The numbers didn't lie. Between the mortgage repairs and constant maintenance, I was sinking. Being house poor wasn't just a phrase, it was my reality. I was living in a dream that was slowly turning into a nightmare. I called Melissa, my colleague in real estate, the next morning. She didn't sugarcoat anything. "Claire, you bought at the right time. Prices in your neighborhood have climbed since then. If you list now, you'll get multiple offers. You could sell, clear your debt, and start fresh." Her words terrified me and comforted me in equal measure. That afternoon, Melissa walked through my home with a professional detachment I envied. Where I saw the bay window that bathed my mornings in sunlight, she saw selling points. Where I remembered late nights curled on the couch with a book, she saw square footage. She didn't see memories, she saw value, and maybe that was what I needed. The offer came almost immediately. A young couple with a 5-year-old daughter who fell in love with the swing set in the backyard. They offered 5% above asking price with only one request: a fast closing. They even allowed me to rent the place for 30 more days while I found somewhere new. It was perfect. Too perfect. Signing those papers was like tearing out a piece of myself. I remember holding the pen, my hand trembling, my chest tight, and thinking, this is the end of my dream. But it wasn't the end, it was survival. And survival, I realized, was worth more than pride. No one knew. I didn't tell my parents because I didn't want the lectures, the guilt trips, or the inevitable suggestion that I should keep the house for Ethan's sake. I didn't tell Ethan because I knew exactly what he would do, twist it into another excuse for his failures. So I carried the secret alone, tucking the signed closing documents into a manila envelope that would soon become the most powerful weapon I'd ever held. The timing was surreal. The closing was set for Thursday, one day before the next Sunday dinner. By the time I walked into that meal, the house would no longer belong to me. Ethan and my parents thought they were unveiling a plan that night. They believed they had cornered me. But what they didn't realize was that the board had already shifted. When I looked at my reflection in the mirror that Sunday before dinner, I saw a woman who had just made the hardest, bravest decision of her life. My parents might call it rash. Ethan might call it selfish. But I knew it was necessary. I had chosen myself for once, over the endless cycle of sacrifice. Have you ever had to make a decision your family would never understand, one that felt like betrayal, but was really your salvation? If you have, share it in the comments. And if you're following this journey, don't forget to subscribe, because the twist you're about to hear is the moment everything turned upside down. I slipped the envelope into my purse that evening, knowing the weight it carried. The papers inside didn't just represent a sale, they represented freedom. The freedom to walk away from a burden. The freedom to end a cycle. The freedom to finally say no. What none of them knew was that by the end of that dinner, their smiles would freeze, their plans would crumble, and for the first time in my life, the power in that family wouldn't belong to them. It would belong to me. And when Ethan raised his glass ready to claim what he thought was his, I was already holding the truth that would shatter everything. Sunday dinners had always been predictable. Same time, same table, same rhythm of family chatter. But that night, as I walked into my parents' house at 5 o'clock, sharp the air felt charged. Something was different. The smell of pot roast floated from the kitchen, but there was champagne chilling on the sideboard, the good china laid out on the dining table, and my father's voice, just a little too cheerful when he greeted me. My mother fussed over me, brushing hair from my face, telling me I looked tired. She asked about work, about whether I was eating well, but her eyes kept darting to the front door. My father poured me a glass of Cabernet and made small talk about the weather, all while glancing at his watch. It didn't take a genius to know they were waiting for Ethan. And then 20 minutes late, he strolled in. Clean haircut, button-down shirt, khakis instead of his usual jeans. He carried a gift bag and a bottle of wine wrapped in tissue paper. My mom gasped like he'd just handed her diamonds. My dad beamed, calling it thoughtful. And I sat there watching the performance unfold. Ethan was the star of the evening, and I was just the audience. Dinner began awkwardly with my mother seated at Ethan's side and my father at the opposite end. Ethan was placed at the head of the table, the spot my father normally claimed. That should have told me everything. Conversation circled around my house, my big, beautiful space, and how empty it must feel with just me in it. My father added comments about how families should stick together and how these are hard times. Ethan nodded solemnly as if he were a wise man rather than the same brother who couldn't hold a job for more than 6 months. I chewed my food slowly, letting their words hang in the air, waiting for the moment I knew was coming. They thought I was oblivious that their hints were subtle, but I had been listening carefully for weeks, piecing together every vague phone call, every strange text. I knew exactly what they were building toward. Finally, when dessert came out, my mother's homemade apple pie, Ethan cleared his throat. He reached for the champagne, popping the cork with a dramatic flourish. "I think it's time we share the good news," he said, filling the glasses my mother had set out earlier. My parents leaned forward, eyes shining with anticipation. And then came the words, dripping with entitlement. "Starting next Saturday, I'll be moving into Claire's house. Just until I get back on my feet, of course." He raised his glass, smiling as if he had just announced an engagement. My parents clinked their glasses with his, waiting for me to do the same. I didn't. Inside my purse, the manila envelope seemed to burn hotter with each passing second. I kept my expression calm, neutral, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Ethan tried to cover it with a smug laugh. Mom and Dad thought it was the perfect solution, he added. "Your spare bedroom will be great for me. You're never home anyway, so you won't even notice." My father chimed in, And it's not safe for a young woman to live alone these days. My mother nodded quickly. It's family helping family, that's what we do. But that was the lie, wasn't it? That's what they did helped Ethan. When it came to me, I was always left to sink or swim on my own. And now they expected me to open the door to everything I had worked for to hand it over like a gift. I lifted my champagne glass not to toast but to buy time. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from clarity. Because tonight, for the first time, I wasn't going to play their game. Have you ever been in a room where everyone thought they had the script written, only for you to realize you were holding the twist in your hands? If you've ever flipped the story when people least expected it, share your moment in the comments. And if you're still with me, subscribe now, because what I revealed at that table is the kind of twist you'll never forget. The envelope was waiting, the truth was ready, and when I laid it down on that table, the entire family's plan would crumble in seconds. And so I smiled calm and steady, because the explosion was mine to control. The cork popped, the champagne fizzed, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Ethan raised his glass higher, repeating his grand announcement. Starting next Saturday, I'll be moving into Claire's house. My parents' faces glowed with pride, as though their son had just earned a promotion, rather than declared himself a squatter in my home. But me, I didn't move. My glass remained poised halfway, the smile on my lips practiced and controlled. Inside, though, my chest thudded with something sharper than anger. It was clarity. They expected me to nod to agree to let Ethan's words become reality. They had planned the whole evening around this moment, my parents setting the table with china, the champagne bottle chilling the rehearsed lines about family sticking together. To them, my silence was the final step before acceptance. I let the pause linger, long enough for my father to frown, long enough for Ethan's grin to falter. Then I set my glass down and folded my hands in my lap. That's an interesting plan, I said evenly. But there's one small problem with it. 3 heads tilted toward me, expectant. My mother leaned forward, her smile just beginning to waver. What problem, honey? Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my purse. The leather creaked as I pulled out a thick manila envelope and set it on the table. Ethan's eyes narrowed. My father squinted. My mother's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. I slid the envelope forward. The problem, I continued, my voice calm but ringing in my ears, is that I sold the house last week. The silence that followed was electric. It stretched heavy and absolute until my mother gasped and pressed a hand to her throat, just like an actress in a soap opera. My father blinked, confusion etched across his features. Ethan's mouth fell open, his champagne glass suspended midair. "You're joking," he said finally, forcing a laugh that landed flat. "This is some kind of weird payback prank, right?" I flipped the envelope open and spread the signed closing documents across the table. The black ink gleamed under the chandelier light. The inspection was completed Tuesday. All contingencies cleared Wednesday. The closing happened Thursday afternoon. The new owners take possession in 28 days. They're a lovely couple with a 5-year-old who's already excited about the swing set. My father snatched up the papers, adjusting his glasses as he read, his expression darkening with every line. My mother shook her head as though denial could change reality. Ethan leaned forward, scanning the pages frantically like he was searching for a loophole that didn't exist. "You did this on purpose," he shouted suddenly, slapping the documents onto the table. "You knew I needed a place to stay, and you sold your house just to spite me." I looked at him calmly. "Not everything is about you, Ethan. I sold the house because it was draining me. $7,000 for plumbing repairs alone. I don't have parents who swoop in to bail me out every time life gets hard. I had to make a decision for me." My father's jaw tightened. "That's unfair, Claire. We've always supported both our children equally." A bitter laugh escaped me. Equally, I worked 2 jobs to pay for college while Ethan's tuition was handed to him. I saved for 8 years to buy that house while you paid his rent every time he came up short. When his car broke down, you bought him another. When mine broke down, you told me to take the bus. The room shook with the weight of words, never spoken truths buried under years of favoritism. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Ethan's face turned red, his anger boiling over. "You've always thought you're better than me, Miss Perfect, with her nice house and fancy job." I shook my head, my voice soft but firm. "I never thought I was better. I just made choices. I worked for what I had past tense." The envelope still sat between us, final and unmovable. My brother's dream had collapsed before it even began. My parents' plan had crumbled into silence. And for the first time, I felt free. Have you ever been underestimated only to reveal you held the power all along? If you know that feeling, share your story in the comments. And stay tuned because the fallout from that night was fiercer than anything I expected. That dinner was supposed to trap me. Instead, it became my liberation. But liberation often comes with fire, and the real battle was only beginning. The weight of my words didn't just land, it detonated. The champagne fizz still clung to the air, but no one touched their glasses. My mother's hand trembled against her throat. My father's brow furrowed deeper with every second. And Ethan's jaw hung slack, his face twisted between disbelief and rage. "You sold your house," my father repeated, as though saying it aloud would undo it. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I sold it last week. The buyers are already preparing to move in. It's done." Ethan slammed his fist against the table, rattling silverware. "You did this to ruin me. You knew I needed a place to stay. You did it on purpose." I leaned forward, meeting his glare. "Not everything revolves around you, Ethan. I sold my house because it was a financial weight I couldn't carry anymore. $7,000 for plumbing repairs alone. More bills every month. It wasn't sustainable." He scoffed, his voice rising. "You're lying. You could have asked Mom and Dad for help. You could have asked me." That last word was too absurd to let pass. I laughed, sharp and bitter. "Asked you? For what? Another loan you'd never repay. Another promise you'd break within a week." My father's voice cut in, stern but shaky. "Enough. We need to think about the family here. Claire, maybe you can reverse this. Talk to the buyers, explain the situation. They might understand." I blinked at him in disbelief. "You want me to cancel a legal contract, risk being sued, lose thousands in earnest money so Ethan can freeload in my house?" "That's not freeloading," my mother protested, tears brimming. "It's family helping family." My composure cracked. Years of resentment surged forward. "No, it's not. Helping is teaching responsibility. What you've been doing is enabling. Every time Ethan falls, you throw him a cushion. Every time I fall, you tell me to get back up on my own." My father's face hardened. "Your brother has had a harder path than you. He needs more support." I nearly choked. Harder path. He failed out of college because he partied instead of studying. He lost jobs because he stole, because he slacked off, because he refused to show up. And you called it bad luck. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs to pay tuition, skipped vacations, skipped meals, because you told me I had to. Where was my cushion then? Ethan shoved his chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood. His voice cracked with fury. "You think you're so perfect. You think you're better than me because you bought a stupid house. Guess what? Now you don't even have that. You're nothing without it." His words should have hurt. Instead, they rolled over me like smoke. "That house didn't define me," I said quietly. "I did. And I'm not the one standing here 30 years old begging for a bed in someone else's home." For a long moment, the only sound was the tick of the dining room clock. My parents looked between us, torn between denial and dawning truth. Ethan's chest heaved, his fists clenched, his face crimson. I slid the papers back into the envelope, tucking it neatly into my purse. "This conversation is over," I said. "The sale is final. The house is gone. Ethan will have to find another solution." My mother sobbed. My father's lips pressed into a grim line. Ethan stormed from the table, muttering curses, the front door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. The silence left behind was deafening. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one expected to clean up the mess. Have you ever spoken a truth so raw it left the room in ruins? If you've ever reached that breaking point, share your moment below. And if you're still with me, subscribe, because what happened after that slammed door was a battle I never saw coming. That night they thought my announcement ended the plan. But in reality, it was only the beginning of the fallout. And the fallout was going to test every boundary I had fought to set. The door slammed so hard the china cabinet rattled, and the echo lingered like thunder after a storm. My mother collapsed back into her chair, sobbing openly, while my father rubbed his temples as if the weight of the world had just landed on his shoulders. But me, I sat still, my purse in my lap, the manila envelope safe inside. For the first time, I wasn't shaking, I wasn't apologizing, I wasn't backing down. "You could have handled that differently," my father muttered after a long silence. How I shot back. By letting him walk into my home as if it belonged to him. By sacrificing everything I've built just to spare his feelings. No, that's over. My mother's tears turned to sharp accusations. "How could you do this to your brother? He has nowhere to go. He's going to be homeless." Claire. Homeless. I leaned across the table, my voice steady. He's not going to be homeless. He has options. He could rent a room. He could stay with friends. He could even move back here with you. That last suggestion hit like a spark in dry grass. My father stiffened. My mother shook her head quickly. That's not possible. His old room is now my craft space. The guest room is full of storage. I laughed bitter and low. So let me get this straight. You'll rearrange my house without hesitation, but you can't be bothered to clear out one of your own rooms for him. The truth stung. My parents exchanged uneasy glances, and I saw it clear as day that they wanted to help Ethan, but only if it didn't inconvenience them. I had always been their convenience, the safety valve for every one of his failures. He needs his independence, my mother whispered, as if the word independence meant latching onto me. No, Mom, I said softly but firmly. What he needs is accountability. You've spent 30 years protecting him from reality. That's why he's standing at 30 with no job, no degree, no stability. Because you never let him learn. My father slammed his palm against the table. Enough, we are trying to keep this family together, Claire. I met his gaze. No, you're trying to keep Ethan comfortable. There's a difference. The silence that followed was thick, the kind that hums in your ears. My mother dabbed at her eyes. My father leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if answers might fall from it. And I sat there strangely calm because the truth had finally been spoken out loud. But that calm didn't last. Within hours of leaving their house that night, my phone lit up like a battlefield. Texts from Ethan poured in accusations, curses, guilt trips. You ruined my life. You're selfish. You'd rather see me on the street than help. Each message nastier than the last. And then came the extended family. An aunt called to say she was disappointed in my lack of compassion. A cousin emailed me about how his brother had lived with him for a year during tough times, as if that were the same thing. Everyone weighed in, everyone had an opinion, and not one of them knew the full story. It was exhausting. Every ping from my phone was another attempt to drag me back into a cycle I was finally breaking. I answered briefly, firmly, the house is sold, the decision is final. Ethan's situation is not my responsibility, but deep down I knew this was only the first wave. The real storm was still coming. Have you ever been the only one in your family willing to say no, and suddenly you're the villain in everyone else's story? If you have, I want to hear it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next chapter of this battle reveals just how far family pressure can go when you dare to set boundaries. I thought selling the house would end things. In truth, it had just lit a fire under decades of resentment. And the fallout was about to get uglier than I ever imagined. Because Ethan wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The days after that disastrous dinner were worse than the dinner itself. If the meal had been a bomb, the fallout was relentless radiation. My phone became a weapon turned against me, pings, vibrations, missed calls, stacked one after another. Ethan's messages were the loudest and nastiest. First came anger. You ruined my life. I told everyone I was moving into your neighborhood, and now I look like an idiot. Then came guilt. You'd rather let your brother sleep on the street than share one stupid room. And finally, the accusations, you've always hated me, you've always thought you're better than me. I could have ignored them, but a part of me wanted to respond. I kept my answers short and factual. I sold the house for financial reasons. Your living situation is not my responsibility. No emotion, no defense, just truth. But Ethan wasn't the only one. My parents tried a different tactic: negotiation. My mom called daily with new proposals, each more absurd than the last. What if we help with the down payment on your new place? Something with an extra bedroom, just for Ethan until he gets on his feet. When I said no, she tried again. What if you let him crash for 3 months? We'll chip in for utilities. I held my ground. Mom, I am downsizing on purpose. Smaller place, lower expenses. I'm not rearranging my life to accommodate Ethan again. Then came the extended family. Aunt Susan called to say I lacked family values. My cousin Patrick sent a long email about how his brother lived with him for a year, and it strengthened their bond. None of them understood the difference between mutual choice and being ambushed with a decision already made for you. It was overwhelming. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a storm, every voice screaming at me to bend. But I didn't. Instead, I focused on my next step moving forward. The buyers had agreed to let me rent the house for 30 days, which gave me breathing room. I deposited the certified check into a new high-yield savings account, money I had never seen in my life before. For the first time, I had a cushion, freedom. I worked with a colleague at my firm to find a new place, something smaller and manageable. When I signed the lease on a modern one-bedroom apartment, tucked inside a converted warehouse, with exposed brick and industrial windows, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: relief. But Ethan wasn't finished. One evening, as I carried boxes into my half-packed living room, his car appeared in my driveway. He didn't text, didn't call, he just showed up. Sitting on the steps, arms crossed, looking like the victim he always played. Inside, I debated locking the door and waiting him out, but part of me wanted the confrontation, wanted to say the words that needed saying face to face, so I let him in. "Nice of you to let me know you were coming," I said, setting my purse down. He didn't answer right away, just glanced at the boxes piled against the wall. The reality hit him maybe for the first time. "So you're really doing this?" he said flatly. "You're really selling?" "It's already sold," I replied. "The new owners move in less than a month." He sighed, dropped onto my couch, and rubbed his forehead. "Mom and Dad said I should apologize. So sorry, I guess." It was hollow, and we both knew it. "Is that all you came to say?" I asked. "No," he admitted. His voice shifted, more desperate now. "I came to see if we could work something out. I'm in a bind here, Claire. My landlord kicked me out. I've got nowhere to go. Just help me out with a loan. First and last month's rent security deposit. I'll pay you back once I get a job." The words were familiar. I'd heard them before every time he hit bottom. Each time the promise of repayment dissolved as quickly as it was spoken. I stood my ground. "No, Ethan, I'm not loaning you money. You've had plenty of chances to save. You chose not to." His face twisted, the apology gone, replaced by bitterness. "Must be nice to be perfect. Some of us have bad luck." "This isn't luck," I said firmly. "This is about choices. You chose concerts over rent. You chose parties over jobs. Now you're facing consequences. That's not bad luck. That's life." He stood, yanking his jacket from the couch. "You've changed, Claire. Ever since you bought this place, you think you're better than us." I shook my head. "I haven't changed. I just stopped apologizing for having boundaries. Maybe it's time you changed." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him, and for the first time, I didn't chase after him. Have you ever had to cut through years of excuses to finally say no to someone who never heard it before? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. And if you want to see how this battle finally reshaped my family, subscribe, because what happened next even caught me by surprise. That night the storm shifted. For once it wasn't me drowning in it, it was Ethan. And watching him sink forced everyone, even my parents, to face truths they had spent decades avoiding. When Ethan stormed out of my half-packed living room that night, I thought the worst was over. I thought refusing him face to face would finally close the chapter. But families rarely let endings be clean. The days that followed proved that cutting ties with one person can unravel an entire web. The texts kept coming, not just from Ethan, but from my parents too. My mother's tone shifted between pleading and scolding. "He's your brother, Claire. You can't just abandon him." Then, "We raised you better than this. Where is your compassion?" My father tried reason, though it was thinly veiled pressure. "If you explained the situation to the buyers, maybe they'd give you more time. Maybe Ethan could stay temporarily." Every message landed like déjà vu, the same cycle I'd lived through since childhood. Ethan fails. They panic, I'm expected to fix it. Only this time I didn't flinch. My replies stayed short, factual, cold. Even the sale is final. My decision stands. And then something shifted. The barrage slowed. My parents stopped calling 3 times a day. Instead, I got a single text from my father one morning. "Your mother and I have been talking. We'll let Ethan use the guest room until he finds a place. We'd appreciate your help clearing the storage." I sat there staring at the words, shocked. For the first time in 30 years, they weren't handing me Ethan's burden. They were picking it up themselves. But even that wasn't smooth. My mother called that night, her voice sharp. "He stays out late, Claire. He leaves dishes in the sink. He treats this house like a hotel." I listened silently, biting back the words I wanted to say, "I told you so." Instead, I murmured, "Sounds like you're getting a taste of what I've been living with." It wasn't just them changing. Ethan was too, slowly, reluctantly. My mom set house rules: rent due on the first of the month, chores assigned weekly, a curfew on weeknights. At first, Ethan exploded. "I'm not a teenager. You can't control me." But for once, my dad backed her up. And something inside Ethan cracked. He realized the safety net had holes. The moment that hit me hardest came 2 weeks later. My dad called, his voice carrying a strange pride. "Your brother has an interview tomorrow, a real one. Marketing firm downtown. He asked me to help him prepare." I nearly dropped the phone. Ethan, the same brother who once skipped exams because they were too early in the morning, was finally taking responsibility. I didn't celebrate too quickly. Skepticism had been beaten into me over decades of false starts. But when I arrived at the next Sunday dinner, I saw it with my own eyes. Ethan wearing business casual instead of his usual t-shirt announcing he'd gotten the job. Entry level, yes, but steady, real, something to build on. That night, while clearing dishes, my mother pulled me aside. Her voice was soft, almost guilty. "I owe you an apology," she whispered. "We see it now. We let him slide too long. We asked too much of you. We didn't treat you fairly." The words broke something in me, not in anger, but in release. For years I had waited for them to see me to admit the imbalance. And finally, standing in that kitchen with the smell of roast still in the air, they did. Have you ever stood your ground so firmly that it forced the people around you to change? If you've had that moment of finally being seen, tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because the ending to this story isn't just about Ethan. It's about what happens when an entire family learns the difference between enabling and supporting. Because while Ethan's growth was surprising, the changes it sparked in all of us were even more powerful. And those changes would reshape every part of my life. 6 months after that explosive dinner, my life looked nothing like it had before. The house, the one I once thought defined me, was gone. In its place stood something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. My new apartment, with its exposed brick and industrial windows, wasn't grand or sprawling, but it was mine on my own terms. No leaks draining my bank account. No endless repairs haunting my weekends. Just a clean slate and space to breathe. But the real transformation wasn't the walls around me. It was what happened inside my family. Ethan surprised me most of all. After his tantrum and slammed doors, he adjusted to living with our parents under rules he never thought he'd follow. Paying rent, even a modest amount, forced him to manage money for the first time. Doing chores kept him accountable. And slowly, he stopped fighting. One Sunday dinner, months after the chaos, Ethan announced he had not only kept his marketing job, but earned his first performance bonus. He said it quietly, almost sheepishly, but I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before: pride. Not borrowed pride from favors or bailouts his own. Later that night, he even texted me, "Never thought I'd say this, but thanks for not letting me move in." I needed the kick. I read it twice, then smiled. For the first time, he wasn't blaming me. He was thanking me. My parents changed too. Having Ethan under their roof again with rules in place opened their eyes to how much they had enabled him in the past. My mother, once quick to make excuses, confessed over coffee, "We thought we were protecting him. Really, we were preventing him from growing up." My father, who once demanded I bend for family, admitted he was proud of me for standing firm. It wasn't a perfect shift, but it was a start. And me, I learned the most important lesson of all: boundaries aren't cruelty. They're love. Love for yourself, and sometimes tough love for others. Selling that house felt like failure in the moment, but it turned out to be the catalyst for everything I needed: financial stability, healthier, family dynamics, and finally respect. I stopped equating worth with possessions. My townhouse now is smaller, smarter, and affordable. I budget not just for bills, but for experiences, trips with friends, cooking classes, moments that feed my soul instead of drain it. And when I think back on the girl who sobbed in her car, clutching the keys to that dream house, I realize she didn't know the truth yet. A dream built on debt and resentment isn't freedom. Real freedom is choosing peace over pride. Have you ever had to make a decision that everyone else called reckless, but deep down you knew it was right? If you have, share it in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories about setting boundaries and finding your own power, subscribe now and keep watching. Because sometimes losing what you thought you wanted is the only way to discover what you truly need. That dinner was supposed to trap me, to chain me to Ethan's failures forever. Instead, it became the night I set myself free. And in freeing myself, I unknowingly freed all of us. Because sometimes the hardest choices aren't just about survival. They're about rewriting the script for everyone who thought you'd play your part forever. As the months settled into seasons, I realized something profound. Peace doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it slips quietly into your life in the stillness of a new home, in the relief of a balanced budget, in the calm of no longer waiting for the next family crisis to explode. I had thought that selling my house meant losing the proof of my independence. In truth, it was the opposite. That decision gave me a deeper independence than I had ever known the independence to choose myself without shame. For years, I had equated sacrifice with love, endurance, with loyalty. But real love, I learned, doesn't demand that you burn yourself out so others can shine. Real loyalty doesn't mean surrendering your boundaries to keep the peace. Ethan's journey mirrored my own in unexpected ways. Watching him stumble into accountability was proof that people can change, but only when they are finally forced to. My parents, too, learned that enabling isn't kindness, and that protecting someone too much can cripple them for life. The family dynamic didn't transform overnight, but each shift felt like a stone pulled from my shoulders. In my smaller townhouse, I found joy in simple routines: morning coffee by the window, evenings free from financial anxiety, time and energy to nurture friendships and passions I had long ignored. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving, I was living. And maybe that's the lesson I want you to carry with you sometimes. What feels like the end is really a beginning. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted creates the space for what you truly need. Because freedom isn't found in possessions, it's found in choices. And the bravest choice you can make is to finally unapologetically choose yourself.